Elville and Associates presents the Advisors Forum, December 2017. The following presentation is for educational purposes only. It is not intended as legal advice or as a substitute for legal advice or legal counseling and does not create an attorney-client relationship.
Hello, everybody. We're going to get started. We're still waiting on a number of people, but I guess Cole might have made them think otherwise. But we appreciate you being here today for our Advisors Forum. So welcome and happy holidays to everybody. It's great to have you here. I see a lot of familiar faces and some new ones. A few very brief items. As many of you know, this is very casual, so please get up, get extra food. We have some nice warm coffee in the back there. There are also restrooms directly above us. And as many of you also know, for certified financial planners and CPAs, you may receive one continuing education credit hour for attending today. So I'll pass around a sheet for you to sign to note your attendance. Our next forum will be Thursday, February 15th, same time and place, so mark your calendars, and invitations will follow in mid-January. And Steve, I guess we'll be talking about the Heckerling.
Yes, we're going to do a Heckerling update.
Okay, very good. So today's speakers are Mr. Stephen Elville, Principal of Elville and Associates, and Ms. Jill Rosner, owner of Rosner Healthcare Navigation. And I'd like to give you a little bit of background about Jill. Jill Rosner, RN, BSN, CCM, is the founder of Rosner Healthcare Navigation, providing healthcare consulting, navigation, care management, and advocacy services for patients and their families. Her extensive credentials have made her a respected speaker, an adjunct lecturer at McDaniel College, and a columnist for the Carroll County Times. As an RN, she understands healthcare and is able to work with both patients, medical and planning professionals to find the best solutions. Her background in nursing and extensive knowledge allows her to help patients and families navigate insurance, healthcare options, aging in place and placement options, and is invaluable for families who live at a distance from their loved ones. Jill is very, very busy, and we appreciate her being here today to share her knowledge. Mr. Elville's work is centered in elder law, special needs planning, and estate planning, with special emphasis in the areas of tax planning and asset protection. Just today, it was announced Mr. Elville was named to the Maryland Super Lawyers list for a third time, so congratulations to Steve. Also, Steve wanted me to mention that we recently opened a new space in Annapolis called the Elville Creative Studios. So if any of you would like to be interviewed regarding a topic that is of interest to you and your clients, please let us know. We would love to have you and show you the space. It's really a wonderful space, done a lot of work on it. So please contact Steve. I'm sure he'd love to share more information about that initiative with you. So without any further ado, Steve and Jill.
Thank you, Jeff. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. And I'm sorry I didn't get to say hello to everybody. I did offer Jill the better podium, and she didn't want it, so that's why I got this. So anyway, happy holidays, and thank you for coming out and supporting our Advisor Forum yet again. Hopefully you can come back in February because we're going to go to the Heckerling Institute in Orlando and bring you back all the information we can from there about what's happening in estate planning. And of course, we have a lot going on with tax reform, so we'll see what happens. You know as much as I do about it, maybe more, so we'll wait and see what happens. So again, I wanted to thank you for coming, and as Jeff said, there's plenty of food, and we're going to try to end right on time at 2 o'clock. I'm going to move this up just a little bit. Today, I want to give you an on-the-ground view of what's happening in healthcare and geriatric care management out there in the world. And some of you are on the front lines of this, as you've heard me say before, and it's no accident that I've asked Jill to come today. So I've worked with many geriatric care managers, and Jill is by far the most effective person, and she's very humble, but she is by far the most effective person I've ever worked with. And of course, there are many geriatric care managers out there now, but I highly recommend Jill, and you'll see some of the experiences that she can share with you today. And for someone like me who is a non-medical person, a non-medical professional, someone like Jill is a tremendous tool in our arsenal to be able to help clients and evaluate situations and try to get people from point A to point B and all points in between. So that's why we wanted to share this with you today. And hopefully this is applicable to you and what you're doing. as you try to give more services and more resources to your clients. So we want to give you an update about the state of Maryland healthcare decision making and kind of what's happening there, and some of the views from the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, my views, Jill's views, what she sees every day out there on the front lines. And again, introduce you to the world of geriatric care managers if you have not yet been introduced to those kinds of people. I want to thank Jeff for putting this together and Lucy for filming. So here we go. So with that said, we're going to get into the slides. And you have a copy of everything today right here that we're going to see. If you can see this, we have a lot of light coming through here, so hopefully you can see this. And also, I wanted to give you what my firm calls our MOLST packet. So if you've never heard of MOLST, MOLST is called Medical Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. And I actually met a very well-known elder law attorney the other day, and we were talking about this issue. And I said to him, you know, gee, that was really something that we learned out there in California. And he said, Steve, I don't even talk to my clients about that. So I was really surprised by that. So the medical orders for life-sustaining treatment, I think, is important to share with clients because it's part of healthcare decision-making. And as you're going to find out, Maryland requires it, and we're going to talk about that. So when we talk to clients at my office, this is information that could be obtained right on the Attorney General's website. This is nothing that we've made up, except some of the organ donation material that was in here. We actually researched that and put it in here, but most of this is just materials that you can get on the internet. But we want to make sure people are aware of it. So in this package, you're going to find the actual MOLST form and the MOLST worksheet and an advanced directive. So just want to let you know what we're handing out there. All right, so let's get into the presentation. And again, feel free to move around and get coffee and so forth. So our first slide, what is a geriatric care manager or aging life care manager? Hi, Jerry. Oh, don't be sorry. Come right in, get some food. And what is their role in planning? And what is their role in the planning team? So those of you who know my firm, we believe in a planning team. The legal, the financial, the tax. None of us knows it all. We need to have collaborative resources. And then some of you have heard me say, we also need to have a geriatric care manager in some cases. So what I thought I'd do is turn Jill loose here to talk about the history of geriatric management. I can only say my limited view is this. When I was a young lawyer, there was no such thing as geriatric care managers. I think there was one geriatric doctor that the elder law community was aware of, and she was in Baltimore, and you had to get lucky to really know her and be able to use her services. So now we have a budding industry. So Jill, would you take the lead here?
Sure. Who here has heard of geriatric care managers? Fair enough. We've actually changed our name. We used to be the National Association of Professional Geriatric Care Managers. That's a big mouthful for most people. And people didn't know we were out there, and we were starting to get confused. 30 years ago, there were maybe a handful of care managers, and then the National Association of Professional Geriatric Care Managers came on board, and we had an association, and from there we've grown to hundreds and hundreds nationwide. But we decided that that name, first of all, was not appealing to clients because nobody likes to have a geriatric care manager come to their house, right? Because they feel that really says they're old, and a lot of times they think that means they're here to take me out, right? That's what they'll say to their family. Oh, you're bringing this nurse over and a social worker, and we come to their house to do an assessment, and they think, uh-oh, what's up? You're trying to put me someplace. So we also want to convey to people that we work with various age populations, not just 65 and older, that we work with a younger population too with other health issues. So we rebranded, and we are now called Aging Life Care Managers. So ALCA is our group, and that's a lot easier to remember than the National Association. So over time, we've grown, and why do people come to us? Why do people seek us out? Because typically, I think I've had, in my practice, maybe people that I can count on one hand who have actually called me themselves and said, I've heard you're out there and I need some help. I actually had a call this past week. You know, my wife and I are getting older and we want to stay in our homes and we want to plan ahead. And I'm always shocked because it's not usually the client themselves that calls me. It's usually their adult children who have now come into the home and they're seeing things that are concerning to them. And so they say, we need help. They don't always know care managers are out there, but they oftentimes find care managers through their law attorneys, occasionally through their physicians. I wish I could say physicians were aware and would refer us. And I have made many aware. We all make physicians aware, but whether or not they'll refer, that's been an issue for whatever reason. Lots of other people refer us, CPAs, financial advisors, people who have contact with the aging population or people who have health crises and they need access to finances. You know, they'll say, I don't know what to do from here, and then that's how we get connected. So it's usually from the adult children. Care managers, let's just talk about different kinds of care managers. Many care managers are social workers. Some care managers have some other degree in another field, maybe physical therapy. There's a couple people out there who are rehab specialists, that kind of thing. And there are a few of us out there who are registered nurses. I happen to have a social worker with me, and that's really a good balance for us. And so what kinds of things do we see? Why do people call us? People call us their children usually. Thanksgiving is a busy time. After the holidays are a busy time because a lot of people who have not been in the home, maybe they come home. They live far away from their parents, they come home and they say, oh my gosh, I didn't know how bad things were. People are so great on the phone and sounding really together. So you call up mom and she sounds like, oh, I'm busy and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And children get home and she can put on a good face for a few hours or a day, but they notice things are askew in the house and she's not taking her meds. And then within a couple of days, they really see all the deficits. And so we get a lot of calls from family members afar who are seeing this, but we also get a fair amount of calls from people who are local, who actually, you know, Steve will call me and say, I have a client that needs your services because the daughter came in today and they're doing some planning with mom, and mom is not doing well living in her home. And so we go out, we do an initial assessment, and then we make suggestions and recommendations. And you know, the catchword these days is aging in place. And most people tell you that they want to be in their homes. They don't all know that catch statement, aging in place, but most people will say to you, I want to live at home. Well, you need help to do that. You know, at some point, most people start to need some help doing that. And we look at, is it feasible? Is their environment safe for them to be in? Can we make the environment such that they can be successful in it? Do they have the financial resources? And I will tell you that probably that's the biggest frustration, because when people want to be in their homes, it costs a lot of money. And so do they have the financial resources to be in their home and get the care in their home that they need? Sometimes people, you know, I'm always surprised when people say, oh, you know, I talked to so-and-so and it's cheaper to be in my house than it is to be in the assisted living or nursing home, and that is not the case. In most cases, if you need 24/7 care, you know, if you need a little bit of support, 4 hours a few times a week, yes, that's the case. But if you need full-time around-the-clock support, that is not the case. It's pretty expensive. $20 to $25 an hour, it's usually living on the $25 an hour side for caregivers, times 40 hours a day, times 30 days, you know, average 30 days in a month. You're looking at sometimes $16,000 a month just to get caregivers who will be there around the clock to help people stay in their homes. So.
And Jill, if you don't mind, could we drill down a little bit into the nurse part? So I've dealt with geriatric managers who were not RNs and didn't realize it at the time, I should have, And then I was kind of disappointed. You know, there was only so much that could be done at a certain point because they're not really nurses. And this is one of the aspects of working with Jill that I've enjoyed a lot, is that she has got that background.
Right.
So can you talk about the difference?
Well, Anne can tell you that really we have kind of a strong medical model, but the great thing is there's two of us, and she has this strong social work background. She also is a former ombudsman from Carroll County and has worked in Howard County also. So she has a really great background with dealing with assisted livings, knowing all the regulations, assisted livings, nursing homes. It's really funny, when I hired her, I said, okay, so you have to take off your ombudsman hat. And she was like, okay, so she goes in and she's like really cool about it, doesn't say anything. Every once in a while I'm like, okay, you need to put the ombudsman hat on because, you know, we'll see things that are really not acceptable. And so then, or she'll say, you know, I'm sorry, but I've got to say something. And I'll say, oh no, go right ahead, because she really has that expertise. And I have the nursing side of expertise. So we work well together because on the medical model side of things, we typically do a first assessment together. Most care management companies do not do that. They send a nurse and a social worker, but we always meet the client, the first assessment together, so that from there, we both know the client, we can both work on things in our expertise. So we'll go in, we'll see someone. So many people right now have such incredibly complex medical situations that it's hard to know how, you know, you can navigate without having some medical background involved.
And Jill, I think this segues into the next slide, which is, you know, what is the situation on the ground today, and what's Jill seeing out there? So please go ahead.
So I would say by far, most of what we see are clients who have some form of dementia. And their families see them struggling with either memory problems or executive functioning problems, which means some people's memories don't seem so bad, but you walk into their house, they can't make decisions about the simplest piece of paper. It looks like a hoarding situation. Sometimes people are naturally, they're hoarders from, you know, pre-morbid, we call it before illness, they're hoarders. But there are people who, their families say, their house never looked like this. It was spick and span, and there's never been all of this clutter. And we walk in and we see they can't make a decision about bills. And some of you may, this is something that really touches on all of you who are in the financial world. People not paying their bills, people not having money, or putting too much money out there, donations and that kind of thing. People who just don't have the executive functioning, they seem to be able to be very socially appropriate, they can talk to you, they seem to know what's going on, yet they can't make any decisions. Everything piles up. I had a client who was 80-some years old, she lived in Tonytown. Her doctor actually called me and said, you know, she doesn't have any family. And she's coming to the office showing up. She doesn't know what appointments are. We call her for appointments. She doesn't show up. I went out to her house. I saw her, and actually, and I got a call from the tax. This is kind of bizarre. Her brother lived in Kentucky, and he called me because the tax office sent in my way because she hadn't been paying her taxes and her house was going to be sold. She had tons of money, but she didn't pay her taxes because she couldn't get through the bills anymore. So I went to her house, and she had every surface in her house was mounted with bills and with flyers from the grocery store, and they had sheets, all of them, even on top of the stove, mounds of paper with just sheets to contain everything. And so she just went on living her life. She didn't pay any bills, she didn't organize anything. There was one little tiny place for me to sit. There was her chair where she sat. She went to McDonald's 3 times a day. She was still driving. And it was really a very sad situation. We actually had to get protective services involved to get her out of her home, to make her safe. So typically we see a lot of dementia. We see a lot of people with mental illness now. That's becoming a really big challenge for family members. Family members who are really struggling because they've had someone with mental illness in their family all their lives. Siblings oftentimes. So I take care of a client who has mental illness. Her parents are both deceased now. She has a trust. Her sister called me and said, you know, like, we can't take it anymore. It's constantly something. But we've worked with this family and this client, and we've really gotten her under really good control. And her family doesn't have all that stress anymore, constant situations and drama. So we see a lot of mental illness. We are seeing more and more people with drug addiction issues who have narcotic or alcohol addiction issues, whose families are really to the point where they're saying, we can't do this anymore, we need somebody else to intervene. So we see a lot of people across the spectrum, lots of chronic illness, congestive heart failure, and diabetes, heart disease, that kind of thing, and people who have more chronic or acute illnesses such as a cancer diagnosis that maybe they don't have a lot of family support and they need some direction.
And Jill, I was thinking, a lot of the financial advisors in this room and CPAs and of course lawyers are on the front lines of seeing their clients be affected and so forth, and I think that's why they've come today. And you're seeing the front lines as well. So I think what you're saying is a good geriatric care manager will be proactive in trying to identify these things. And we're going to get into abuse and all kinds of things that are going on out there today. And Jill's going to give you some examples. But would you agree with me, a good geriatric care manager or team is going to be proactive?
Yes, and we do. We love it when families call us before the crisis, but I can't tell you how many times we get a call saying, my mother's in the hospital, she's got to go to rehab, she's never going to be able to go back to her home and live alone anymore. We need to know what to do now. And she doesn't have any money, she's going to need medical assistance. Or, we need to know how to move forward. A lot of times we do get people who are proactive and say, come and do this assessment now, and that's great because we have eyes on now. We do a very thorough assessment. We're in the home a couple of hours at least, sometimes 3 hours, and we do head to toe. We do health assessment, we do home assessment, we do safety and risk assessment, go through what kind of accommodations need to be made in the house. We do psychosocial, who's the family, who's involved, who's doing what. So we go through everybody's entire sort of like the medication list, not only their list, but we look at their pills and how they're taking them and count pills if we need to see if they're taking them properly. So we do a really thorough assessment to begin with, and then we make recommendations based on those assessments, whether if somebody wants to stay in their homes, we look at their financial, and that's how sort of we all tie together. We look at their, not only, we're really the coordinators, we look at what are their health problems and their maybe cognitive problems, what do they need to be safe, whether it's in their home or moving on, and how much money do they have to support this? Who do they have for support around them? What is it that they plan for? Do they have a plan? Do they have any money? And do they have an elder law attorney that can help direct them through some of these things? So.
And Jill, we're going to move on to some more
Sure.
slides, but I wanted you to maybe touch on, Jill said we're the managers. There's a team, there's a caregiving team in place that Jill is usually managing in some way. So can you explain how some of the agency nurses relate to what you do? So an agency sends their nurse out every 2 weeks or whatever they do. How do you fit into that picture?
Okay, so just to be clear, this is a really confusing topic for many people. When people talk about home health care, there's a distinction in home health care. There's skilled home health care, which means you left the hospital or you had some kind of problem, you saw your doctor and you have a health problem, maybe you have a wound on your leg or something, and this skilled home health care comes in. There's a Hopkins Home Health, there's Carroll Hospital Center has one, Northwest, actually they've combined to be Maryland Home Care, there's Beata, there's all kinds of Medisys, there's all kinds of home health care out there that are skilled nursing. They send a nurse in to do intake and then maybe come out to see somebody once a month if they need that. They have physical therapists, occupational therapists, and speech therapists. Those are paid by Medicare under Part B, if it's an outpatient service that's paid for by Medicare. People confuse home health care, the aides, or what we call residential service agencies. Those are the visiting angels, the right at home, the home instead, all of those that you see on TV, the advertisements. Those people are non-skilled They're aides, and those are called residential service agencies, but they're clumped under home health care. So those aides come into the home, and they may be there around the clock and shift work. They may be there, 4-hour stretches a few times a week or every day. And the way that we sort of interact with them is usually we're the ones that refer to the home health, whether it be they need skilled nursing needs or they need a residential service agency. We usually refer to the companies that we work well with. We know they're responsive, we know they're going to do a good job, we have good communication with them, and then those aides are accountable to their agency. However, we're sort of the eyes on the ground because their agency is coming in for a 45-day or 60-day nursing assessment of the client, but they're not coming in and seeing them on a regular basis. It's just the aides coming and going. So we're really managing them, even though they're accountable to their agency, we're really managing them to make sure that the client is getting what they need and that caregivers are doing what they're supposed to do. And a lot of times we're the intermediary between family because family doesn't want to be the ones who say, we didn't like that caregiver, we didn't like how she interacted with mom, or we found her sleeping, or that person doesn't really interact very well, she's on her phone a lot. I mean, these are things we hear, or they weren't responsive, they don't seem to be able to handle mom well. We're the ones that oftentimes are the intermediary. We go to the agency and say, we need to talk about this caregiver. Sometimes we direct line talk with the caregiver. Sometimes we go to the agency and say, these are some issues. Sometimes we have to say, we don't want that caregiver anymore. So that's how we really sort of manage that part of it.
Appreciate that. And if time allows, I would like you, maybe at the end, if we have time, to talk about hospice and how sometimes you are interacting with hospice. Okay, in the interest of time, we're going to move on to the next slide. Thank you, Jill. There's much more to say coming up. So financial abuse, conflicts of interest, conflicts between siblings, accountability, problems, abuses of power, undue influence, special needs, and spousal situation. So that's a mouthful. So I'm going to just get into this a little bit. So we're seeing a lot of financial abuse. I know you are on the front lines of seeing what's happening with your clients' assets. Recently, I had to call a financial advisor in Columbia and make them aware that a distant relative or acquaintance of the family was trying to exercise undue influence over someone with a $3 million brokerage account. Someone that Jill, we'll get into this case study a little bit, but someone that Jill had found to be mentally incapacitated and was really getting ready to be exploited to some degree. So, Jill, any stories or pointers that you have?
Oh my gosh, you know what? I wish we could say that this is not a problem. This is a huge, huge problem. And if you haven't seen it, I'm going to tell you it's only because you didn't see it, because it's happening. It is happening out there all the time. For example, all of a sudden, a niece comes on the scene who is never involved in care. Suddenly wants to take Auntie out to lunch, wants to take her shopping, wants to do this and do that, and they just get themselves embedded in that person's life, and then before you know it, their money's going out the window. From your end, I can tell you that if you start to see changes in spending patterns, and you know your clients, if you've got somebody with you that's been with you 20 years or more, and they were always a frugal person, and now all of a sudden they're wanting money, and they're calling you. This is one of the big signs, I'm sure you see this. The people who are calling you incessantly about their money. What about my money today? And they don't remember that they called yesterday, or they called earlier today, they called last week about the same thing. Those are the red flags. And it is so helpful if the people who are seeing this start to actually document that this is happening, and then reach out to someone. Because in the banking world, if somebody's coming in with their niece and starting to take money out or change accounts, that's a red flag, and they're mandatory reporters. I don't know in the financial world if there's a mandatory reporting kind of system. Do you know him? So those are things not to just kind of think, oh, that's odd, to really the red flags going up. Right now, we have another client who suddenly, we didn't even know he had some other sister. He has an aging brother who's his guardian, and we he's not doing very well, we're worried about his ability to be a guardian, and all of a sudden, their sister invited them to Thanksgiving. And we're like, sister, what sister? And she's bringing them for Christmas. And we're thinking, that seems innocent enough to a lot of people, but we've seen it enough, and you've seen enough that even that, to me, it's red flags. So you have to be really, really, really diligent in looking at anything that's abnormal, unusual, family members that are starting to call up and inquire on their behalf, even if they're with them. A lot of undue influence out there, even people who are cognitively okay, but they're really being kind of pushed along. You better do this, you better do that. We're seeing a lot of that.
And then, as far as conflicts of interest, one of the biggest problems in law, in elder law, is an elder law attorney who doesn't recognize who their client really is, and having a false representation or an adverse representation that is adverse to an elderly person because they don't know who their client is. So I don't know in your particular professions whether you could apply this kind of thinking to whether there's conflicts of interest that you could fall into or that you see others falling into, but among lawyers certainly there is. Conflicts between siblings, Jill giggled when I mentioned this one. So sad, we want family cooperation if we can. If we don't have family cooperation, we want to identify what the problem is so we can try to manage it. So Jill, you're seeing a lot of this firsthand.
There's a syndrome we call in care management Sister Sally in California. Sister Sally in California has the best ideas, and she thinks that everybody here taking care of mom is doing it all wrong. And she knows how to do it, and the people here who are actually watching mom or dad or both decline and having all these struggles, she has all these friends, no, you shouldn't be doing that, you should be doing this, you shouldn't be. She flies into town for 2-3 days, she thinks that she knows how to handle it, and they're doing it all wrong. That's one of the issues. A lot of families complain about that there's one sibling who does essentially nothing, but then tells everybody else how they should be doing it. There's the martyr syndrome, where the martyr thinks they have to do everything. I don't want your help. I'm going to take care of mom. I'm going to make sure I do it all. I don't want your help. You're not doing it right. I know how to do it. Until the martyr hits the wall and they're stressed out. And then suddenly they blame everybody else. You never help. You're never here. You never do anything for mom. Well, you really alienated your family because you are the only one that can do it. And then everybody else says, okay, fine. They throw their hands up in the air. When they get stressed, then it's everybody else's fault. It's their problem. So lots of family conflict. When we get to the part about advanced directives in most forms, you better make sure that your whole family, even if they seem to get along, is on board with your wishes, because there's nothing worse than the splintering at the end when there's potential conflict about how you're going to be cared for, even if you have it written down. So we see a lot of conflict, a lot of people in denial. The sibling in denial saying, mom doesn't need any care, she's fine. We had a client a few months ago where the brother, he's a PA, he had us over and said, I'm really worried about my mom. And sister was like, she's fine. Her house, we found all these disaster points, and she practically blind going up and down stairs, and we made all these recommendations, which sister thinks it's okay to come over and make mom breakfast, leave her pills out for lunch with her sandwich, call her up and say, take your pills and eat your sandwich. Brother was coming over at one point to have dinner with her, and that's as far as it went, because sister said, we don't need people in the home. We don't need all these services. It's just a matter of time before the crisis hits. But sometimes siblings just don't see eye to eye on what it is that mom needs. And a lot of times we'll go in and we'll have a family meeting and say, we really need to sit down and talk to everybody, or everybody needs to get our report so everybody can see that this is an issue. Or it's not.
Proactivity.
Yes.
And along those lines, I had a client referred recently, 2 clients in their early 90s, and they said, we have 5 children, they've always gotten along, we've always had family harmony, but just recently, one of our sons has started to act strange. And we think it's because his wife's mother died and we didn't act properly, or we didn't get to go to the funeral, or we didn't do what he thought we ought to do. And now we're really worried that no matter what we do in our advance directive, no matter what we do in our power of attorney, this son is going to cause issues among our family. So we want family harmony, and if we can do a family meeting, sometimes we can repair that kind of thing. accountability and abuses of power where there's no accountability. So just know under Maryland law, since 2010, there are now certain circumstances where powers of attorney, meaning attorneys in fact, have to account. And of course, trustees have to provide notice under Maryland law to qualified beneficiaries and so forth. So a lot of times it's this lack of accounting that causes all kinds of sibling rivalries, and sometimes family meetings and some method of accountability can tamp down the tension so that there's not an all-out guardianship. We want to make sure we get to the examples, but Jill, you talked about special needs, so we'll probably wait for that. We have an example of that. Spousal situations, second marriages, where two people came together, even if they have a prenuptial agreement, even if they have a postnuptial agreement, the assets of the spouses are subject to Medicaid spend down. So sometimes people come together, they don't realize that when they get married, for Medicaid purposes, their assets are considered to be joint. And now if they have to do a Medicaid spend down, the well spouse can kind of blow up the estate plan of the person who is sick and not necessarily leave assets to their children. So all kinds of potential problems in elder law about spousal situations and how the assets could be transferred or not transferred by a spouse with a power of attorney. Jill, any comments about spousal situations and how you go in and, let's say it's a conventional situation. You go in and you help the well spouse with direction.
Okay, so first of all, I have to tell you all I'm completely tainted on this subject. I was at dinner on Monday night with a group of friends who I've known since our oldest children are 28 years old. We have a child study group together. Over the years, people have scattered, but there's a base group of us, and many of us are divorced. And we had this big conversation, and I have to tell you, I said to them, why would you get married again? You had children, it's a mess. Let me just tell you the second time around, blending families and money, it's a mess. Don't do it if you don't have to. So, she shakes her head. So, I say that because we see this all the time. Two families get together. Mom has, this is what I see mostly. Mom was married to a man who did well and saved well, and I'm sure you guys see both sides of it all the time. But Mom was married to a man who saved well and had lots of assets for her to take care of her. She remarried the guy who didn't have as many assets, maybe no assets. They keep their money separate in separate banking accounts. Both their families think, oh, it's okay. Their funds are separate, and then stepdad develops dementia. He now has to go to a facility because he's combative or just can't be maintained in the home. And Mom finds out, and her children find out, that she can get the house, the car, and how much? What's the grand total, 119 or something?
Oh, right, 119.
So the house, the car, and $119,000. And so Mom, unless she gets an elder law attorney to help her out with that, is now going to have to spend down, and she's going to have very little left for her care, and stepdad is going to have a lot left for his care. That's an issue. The other issue here is how people divide their money. I've had clients who went into a marriage, the stepdad sold his house and decided to give all his money to his children now. I'm going to be nice, I'm moving into this other house, I'm going to give the kids all the money now. Well then guess what? He has no money for his care because he didn't think about that. And now the money's coming out of her pocket for his care, and there could be spend down issues for him. There are later issues of 5-year look back. So it gets kind of messy. So I'm sorry.
No, that's quite all right. So there are many, many stories. So in the interest of time, because I want to get to the examples and we want to talk about mulch and so forth, let's get to this slide now. So Jill, in a nutshell, is it best to get an advisor or a manager, I should say a geriatric manager, involved sooner than later?
Yes. Now I'll tell you what, people will flinch when you tell them that the cost of an assessment. It's ridiculous. It's like nothing compared to the mess you can get yourself into and this money that you may end up spending down the road. To have just a first-time assessment. We always say, you'll come to the assessment, If you don't need our services anymore, that's great. We'll give you the roadmap. You head on down the road. And if you need help, you want us to hold your hand, we'll do that at an hourly fee. And oftentimes, the ones who are the people who are thinking, oh, we don't need that, are the ones who end up spending a lot more money because they made some bad decisions on plan.
So sooner than later, and my experience is that people are looking for help. So any situation that I even get the slightest hint that someone needs help, they're really stuck, they don't know how to place their loved one. Jill has worked on situations where we're placing people from a nursing home, someone that has PTSD, someone who's really difficult and has to be placed into an assisted living, tough placements or easier placements or assessments in the home. I find that people are looking for help, and every time I refer Jill, I know it's very needed, and people grasp onto that. Affordability, Jill, you don't have to tell your prices, but generally speaking, how much is a geriatric care manager per hour?
About 125 to 150. I know that some of the corporate kind of life, Senior Bridge, they're like 175 an hour, but most are about 125 to 150 an hour. Some of us do a flat fee for the initial assessment.
And I tell clients, relatively speaking, this is a low-cost service that is worth its weight in gold, and that's been my experience. A huge opportunity to provide assistance. I just put a few notes down here to provide certainty, continuity, clarification, and guidance, and peace of mind for people by getting them connected to someone who's an expert. All right, now let's go to the next slide. What is the current state of the advanced directive in Maryland, and why is it considered to be lacking? So let me tell you a real quick story. We had our client event about a month and a half, 2 months ago, and Barbara Jacobs, who is the head nurse for Anne Arundel Medical Center, was kind enough to come, and she talked about how the advanced directive is really lacking. It's really not covering all the bases these days. So I'm making a lot of assumptions here. I'm assuming that you know what an advanced directive is, and there is one in your handout, and then I'm assuming you know about the MOLST form, which is a medical order signed by a doctor. And then in the middle here, we have the MOLST worksheet. So first of all, the comments from Anne Arundel Medical Center. This advanced directive is really not that effective these days, okay? It's got a lot of holes in it. How do you take this advanced directive and make it work with this highly technical MOLST form? It just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. So what do you do there? Now, juxtapose that with my recent experience. I'll just throw this out there. I went out to a conference for the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys and heard Dr. Susan Toll. Now, she is a leading doctor in Oregon who is a thought leader about end-of-life issues and healthcare issues. And if you want her presentation, I'm happy to send it to you, is what is POLST, which is, some states call it POLST, Physician's Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment. And I'm happy to send that to you. But in a nutshell, she was saying some things that I didn't know. I knew that Maryland requires MOLST. I knew that that's something I want to share with all clients. I don't advise clients about MOLST. I simply tell them that it exists, that they need to know about it, that their healthcare agents need to know about it, that it's required in Maryland under certain circumstances, and I tell them they should go talk to a doctor. But what I didn't know is that Maryland was the only state in the United States that requires it. And that I also did not know that there's a lot of opposition to this, and people like Susan Toll don't think that it should be required. And I'll leave it up to you to do further reading about it, about how it possibly causes more people to die in hospitals than are normal, especially minorities in Maryland. So with that said, we have the advanced directive, we have MOLST, and we have the MOLST worksheet. I came back from the conference thinking, gee, if Maryland is the only state that requires MOLST, and we all are going to have MOLST probably someday, how do we have input into MOLST? Because if our advanced directive is lacking, what do we do? So my question to Jill is, should we be using the MOLST worksheet, which you'll see in your packet?
Yes, so the difference between the advanced directive and MOLST is a lot of people, not enough people have advanced directives, but advanced directives usually cover the 3 categories. If I'm in a vegetative state, what do I want? If I have a terminal illness or
A vegetative state and an end-stage condition.
End-stage condition. Well, guess what? there are physicians out there who do not believe that Alzheimer's disease or any of the dementias are end-stage conditions. And that becomes a problem. So if you have not designated in your advanced directives that if I have any kind of dementia or neurologic condition, I do not want all of these things, that there's a huge hole there. I made sure when I made my advanced directives that it specifically says if I have this kind of dementia, any kind of dementia, if I have any neurogenic disorder that is going to cause loss of functioning, I do not want a feeding tube. I do not want to be on a ventilator. I do not want any kind of corrodes. But most people do not add that piece. The most is more specific. It says it replaces the old do not resuscitate order. You used to see these little pieces of paper on the refrigerator. It replaces that. They no longer do those. So what happens is it's mandated by law, if you go into a hospital or assisted living or nursing home, that form has to be filled out. So for those of us who are young and healthy, if we were to go into the hospital and fill out a MOLST, most likely when you look through your MOLST, we're going to say, yes, resuscitate me, do everything. Do everything. However, there's a worksheet there that you can talk about under certain conditions. For example, if you're 50 years old and you happen to, we have a client recently who had just retired and moved out to Carroll County. He and his wife, were going to enjoy a nice retirement. He was a golfer, and he had a massive stroke at like 58 or something, 60 something, massive stroke. Now, his advanced directives don't count for that stroke because it's really not end stage, it's not terminal, and he's not in a vegetative state, but he has a feeding tube. And he had in his advanced directives and he didn't want a feeding tube, but because he had this stroke and it was this crisis situation, he couldn't eat after the stroke, they put a feeding tube in. And then it became a problem with his wife going back in time saying, what can we undo? So the MOLST is so important. There's a worksheet there that says, if you had something that was life-threatening, would you want to put a time frame on it, like a ventilator? If you were in a car accident and you needed ventilation and you needed a feeding tube, yes, do that. But in 3 months, if I'm still in a coma, or 6 weeks, or you pick your time, right? Then you say to stop it. Remember the big case, the Terry Schiavo case. That was a mess, right? Because nobody knew what she wanted. Had she had a MOLST form that said, hey, if I have a stroke or some kind of crisis that causes me to be in a vegetative state, I would like to have treatment, but after 6 months or 3 months or 2 months or whatever, please stop all of that. Because most of us would not want to live in a nursing home on a ventilator with tube feedings in that kind of condition. We might say, if I had a massive stroke, I want you to try something for a short, limited period of time because I might get over that hump. I might rehab and get past that hump. Most of us would not want to live in that kind of situation. So our client's wife was making decisions about whether to go to hospice because his advanced directive said no feeding tube, and yet he had a feeding tube.
So, Jill, would you say almost that the MOLST worksheet really almost is replacing the advanced directive to some degree?
What do you think?
I think it should.
It should. I think it should because you pull out somebody's advanced directive, oh my gosh, I see this all the time. I have a client, he's 80-some years old with Parkinson's. He has his advanced directives to say don't do all this stuff. Yet his son came to town a few weeks ago and he sat down with us to look over the MOLST and go through that instruction sheet. He's like, oh yeah, I want to be resuscitated. And I'm thinking, oh, you have on your advanced directives? No, but your MOLST should always be compatible with your advanced directives. So if your advanced directives say do everything, then your MOLST is going to say do everything.
So if I could interject.
Yes.
So that's one of my big issues. So you have an advanced directive that says this, but the MOLST is going to be implemented by a physician, not you, and it's going to be implemented. So what is the connection to make sure that the MOLST form is completed in accordance with your advanced directive, which is very non-technical? And I'm assuming it's be proactive and use the MOLST worksheet, which is this
Yes.
middle of the road thing. So
Yes.
you can sign your own MOLST worksheet, or your clients can sign their own, but they can't sign the MOLST. But you can sign the worksheet and have it part of your record.
It has to be signed actually by a physician. And I have to tell you that you have to talk to your family about it, because in crisis, I have seen too many times, a physician will look at the wife. I had a client who was a disaster, and they looked at his wife, and she knew what his MOLST said, and she said, don't resuscitate, and darn it, if he had a blood pressure of 30 over nothing, he was barely alive, and he looked up and he said, do everything. And the nurse at Sinai said to me, I couldn't even believe it. So guess what? They resuscitated him. Even though his MOLST, he does not have the cognitive ability to make that decision anymore, but he at the time said resuscitate me. And he went on to live in a terrible state in a nursing home that didn't want him and tried to throw him out. And that's a big court test. And so it was not a good situation. So physicians do not, there's a law that says you have to follow them, and you can get a $10,000 fine for not following someone's advanced directives. But so many times I had a patient at an assisted living, she had 10 children, and 5 of them said put a feeding tube in, and 5 of them said don't, and her advanced directive said don't. And they did it anyway because the doctor looked at them and said, what do you want to do? And you should never have asked them. The MOLST is right there in your face. Do not ask someone, look at the MOLST. So this lady got a feeding tube and died like 3 weeks later after misery of pulling out a feeding tube and all of that kind of stuff.
So Jill, as we move on
Wait,
towards...
John has a
Go
question.
ahead, John.
Quick question. I always think of a MOLST form for my own mom and dad who are in their 80s, but not for me. But this is a wake-up call. Everybody in this room probably needs a MOLST. Everybody.
Well, I'll just say that Dr. Susan Toll, who was this is one person I heard, she is against the overuse of MOLST too soon. But she does feel that because Maryland requires it, we probably should be very proactive with our MOLST worksheet. So would you say, in summary, what should clients do, what should our advisors do to prepare themselves for healthcare decision making? Would you say, talk to your doctor about the difference between the advanced directive and MOLST and this in-between vehicle, the worksheet, and should you fill it out in advance? Would you agree with that?
Yes, I do think so, but I also think that you need to update. Because most of us in this room would say, do everything. Or don't put a feeding tube in if I have a brain, a stroke or some kind of brain injury. But most of us would want everything. So update it. Don't wait 30 years from now. And then you have the same old MOLST hanging around.
So the worksheet, remember, is giving you input into your potential MOLST form. And that's what I'm really talking about.
Yes.
Lorraine?
And Steve, my name's Lorraine Whitaker. Most of you don't know me. Steve does know me. I'm a litigator. And I don't write these things, but I do trials, a lot of trials and this stuff. My question from a litigator's standpoint is this. We got a DNR, we got a MOLST that doesn't agree, and we got a worksheet. What's the court going to do with that? And because we do have lawyers in my office who will do advanced directives and stuff, I don't know personally, but they do. Are you telling me the worksheet has no legal bearing in the court of law, or does it?
I think the worksheet is an unknown. For example, I'll digress for just a second. Barbara Jacobs from Anne Arundel Medical Center, she came to our client event, she handed out this form, which is in your packet. She said, try to start more conversations with families. I think this is a good tool. This is free. You can order this, I understand, from a nonprofit. She seemed, and this is not a judgment, she seemed to be clueless about what the worksheet was. But the Attorney General puts it out there, then I come back from California and I find out that the worksheet the MOLST is required, and Maryland is the only state that requires it. So it seems to me that worksheet is there for a reason. So in my first blush opinion would be, if the advanced directive said, no, my agent can't change my decisions, instead of yes, my agent can change my decisions. It says no, and the person's MOLST worksheet and MOLST are consistent, then I think that's the position the court would take. But if the agent has the ability to change the MOLST, has the ability to change the person's decisions, then I think you've got a mess there.
And by the way, in your example, the doctor the person probably doesn't have capacity that says do everything. And I do advise doctors as part of my practice at times. I advise my doctor every time to save the person and, you know, as a liability issue. Because they use their license, and two, they can give them criminal charges. If the person's trying to save me and you say, oh, there's a piece of paper here that says.
Oh, no.
that one time.
No, I agree with
I have
you.
to disagree with that example. I understand that the person did not have a good ending, but.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you on that.
It's important to have it on paper, so that if he didn't look up and say, save me, that when the doctor looked at his wife, she could say, his most form says, don't save me.
I
And
understand
then
that.
she doesn't have that guilt of like, I gotta make that decision. Because doctors should really be looking at the form, not looking to family to make that decision, because then you're opening up a can of worms. Especially in these cases where there's 5 family, 10 family members and they're divided on what should happen.
Thank you, Lorraine.
I don't think I have an understanding, and I don't need to take her.
No, go ahead.
This is really interesting to me. DNR and Mulch don't agree. Because from what I understand, the Mulch is being filled out with the doctor.
Yes.
So
Well-
we can do all the planning we want with our clients. And then they get in front of the doctor in the situation, and the doctor fills out the Mulch and has no idea that this worksheet may exist or the DNR.
So the worksheet is, my understanding is, it's supposed to be part of your medical record if you sign it with a nurse practitioner. Now, let's say I get shipped to assisted living and I have to have a Mulch form within 48 hours. And I'm just making this up. Let's say no family member shows up. A doctor comes in there and fills out my Mulch form. Who advised this doctor about what I wanted? And what did that doctor put in my Mulch form? So that's the scary part to me.
Sure.
Yeah.
But my point is, if you have that situation, you have a Mulch form, and you know, the family shows up, they come to us, we hand over our copy of the advance directive, and now they're in conflict and we're in a courtroom. Does anybody have any idea what's going to happen in that situation?
I think the Mulch is going to control myself because it was signed by a doctor. But
So the persons who, when they were in their right mind, set this down 5 years before, their wishes aren't going to control.
I think it's a matter of, did the doctor have a chance to talk to this person as they were filling out the Mulch form, or if this person was incapacitated and the doctor filled it out and it's inconsistent. But see, it's very difficult as a medical person. I can't tell if it's inconsistent or not because one's technical and one isn't.
Because what it seems to me the legislature has done is set up a complete system between lawyers and doctors about who's going to control what happens to a patient when the patient can't make a decision for themselves anymore. That's a very dangerous situation for patients. We're going to go on, the doctor's going to go on, but
The patient is ultimately supposed to be making that decision beforehand.
which is what the
they're-
advance directive is
they're
supposed to do.
Leaving it to the wind if they have no advance directives, no moles. Then anybody can tell them, any family member can say, do this or do that. And that's what I tell people. You're leaving it up to someone else to make a decision. If you have a Mulch filled out and it is signed by the doctor, you've done it with the doctor and it has a date on it, that should be followed. Now, if it's not consistent with your advance directives, you better go back and change your advance directives and update them because a lot of people have it and they've had advance directives from 30 years ago.
Can they do this with their regular physician?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if they have an emergency, if they have, and they don't know that it exists with the regular physician, and another one gets done? I see a lot of potential. I see a lot of work for attorneys. To be honest with you.
And I know Victoria has a question. To me, and I'll stand subject to someone telling me I'm wrong, the Mulch worksheet should be filled out, and that should dictate how the Mulch is filled out. So that is continuity in my mind. And then you have to put it on a website like DocuBank or your broker-dealer's vault, or the Maryland Registry. You have to put it somewhere where it's always available, or it's part of your medical record. And I think that's the real disconnect. Victoria?
Just a comment from another institutional aspect. Hopkins is pushing it, and they are teaching that it's meant to supersede. It's meant to be the end of the end of the line, the last thing. So that, your intuition on that, I think is what they're saying is.
Okay. All right. So that's what I think we're here to talk about is this disconnect and how can we shore it up. And I'm sorry we don't have more answers other than You do the MOLST worksheet and show it to your doctor. Now, we need to wrap up. We're over already, but maybe 5 more minutes just to go through real quick the examples so we have some clarity. So let's talk about this and wrap up. Here we have a mother, 89 years old. She lives in a condo. She has 24/7 caregivers, so she's doing pretty well. This is a wealthy lady who's got the money to pay 24-hour caregivers in the home, $15,000 a month. But even with her caregivers, she's still able to get out of the house and get outside the locked unit, not the locked unit, but the locked doors of the condo outside, and it's cold weather. How does this happen? You have 2 caregivers that are private. There's no geriatric care manager, and yet this lady can still be vulnerable to being left out in the cold. What is going on there?
Well, the caregivers, obviously, there's no kind of system on the door to chime or let people know that she's trying to get out. No system to make sure that if she does get out, they can find her. So in that case, the caregivers are probably not being held accountable to being awake and making sure that they've got their eyes on her at all times. And there's so much technology out there now to, alarms and dings and cell phones tracking and cameras.
But those caregivers need management.
Excuse me?
They need management.
Yes,
Okay.
they need some help making sure that either a family member is in there making sure that they're doing what they need to do, or
All right.
somebody's organizing.
All right, so dangerous situation, even though she has 24-hour care. Now, this situation, we have a young male, 64 years old. He has early Alzheimer's. It's very aggressive. He wants to remain home as long as possible. Now, this is a tragic situation that I actually experienced with a client, and he eventually died in his 60s from early Alzheimer's. But here he is trying to stay in his home. His wife is trying to do everything she can. What could you do to help?
I usually, in those cases, send my clients to a neuropsychiatrist, and they usually work with them. We look at what the triggers are for aggression and kind of train people to redirect and how to handle people appropriately, and then sometimes you really just need to refer them to a neuropsychiatrist to make sure medication-wise, all the medications are not causing these aggressive side effects, or that they have medications that make them more comfortable, less anxiety, those kinds of things, less paranoia, so that they can be more successful and not aggressive and be successful in their homes.
Okay, this is a male, 69. He's still working. He has advanced Parkinson's. He's a tough guy, but he lives in a CCRC, a continuing care retirement community. What would you do in this situation?
Not send them to the
Okay, not send them there.
Okay.
Okay.
That's another kind of thing that Ann and I think probably agree on, that they're not always the best places for care down the road. We've got a lot of experience with CCRCs. There are a lot of them are having financial issues these days, and they're cutting care, and where they cut it at the end. They make the beginning really beautiful. You want to move in, you want to have that independent lifestyle, and by the time you get to the end, the care is not so good.
So be cautious, but you could still
Be
manage.
cautious,
You could
but-
still visit and
but
manage.
We do go see people in assisted living facilities and long-term care facilities. We make recommendations. We're very nice. Ann told me yesterday, was it yesterday or the day before? We were at a local facility, and she told me I needed to suck up better because I was really kind of frustrated with something that wasn't followed through on, and so I made that concern.
So we advocate for them because
Yes.
a lot of the CCRCs will try and push them into the nursing home or push them into the assisted living,
Before
as
time.
opposed to allowing them to stay in the independent, using their resources to stay
And that
where
is
they
a
want
big
to
issue
be.
I have seen
So
as
we
well.
advocate
Yes.
for them.
All right. Now, case study number 4 is a similar situation to the male who has dementia. Is it violent at times? But my point here is there's a spouse here, and the spouse is completely exhausted, even to the point of being debilitated.
Get the care into the home. If there's financial resources, we advocate for the spouse too, because if you don't have a willing and able spouse or caregiver, then you can't have someone in their home. So sometimes it's a balance, you have to make a decision. If the caregiver says, I can't do it anymore, or we're seeing, they're not saying that because they feel too guilty, but we're seeing it. We're saying, get either some respite care, get a 24/7 caregiver in here, get live-in, get relief to the caregiver so that they can be functional. And in the worst case scenarios, if it really isn't possible anymore, then we may have to move someone on.
Okay, very good. And we're going to hurry up here. We know we're over the time. This is a single female. She's living in a nursing home, but the nursing home says we don't deal with dementia cases. But there she is. She's already in the nursing home.
So we go in and we advocate strongly for people to not be moved around and for them to learn how to deal with these people. And if it's a situation where it's not a locked unit and they can't be there, I have a client right now, one of my very good friends, her father ran out the window of an assisted living the other night at 3 a.m. The helicopters were circling over on a cold night looking for him. He was in the assisted living. He had been moved from the independent to assisted. He has dementia. He's confused and paranoid. He got out the window. Their memory care unit, which is a locked unit, doesn't have any beds available. And I frankly don't even like that unit. So I said, go look at this one. She just texted me on my way here today and said she likes it. So it's our place where we just let somebody else go. So and they have a bed, believe it or not. Yeah, so we sometimes say this is not the appropriate place and we're going to advocate for you to be in the appropriate place.
And this study here is the 81-year-old who's being exploited by a distant family member. Okay, and real quickly here, we have some practical considerations about her capacity. At what point do we kind of have to back off and say, she's got the right to make her own decisions, versus this person's being exploited and they don't have capacity. Very difficult situation. And I know we have to move on, get this done. Here's a special needs beneficiary. Jill has come into cases like this, and she mentioned it earlier very subtly, being able to take a bad situation and make improvements. Being able to take someone who's drug addicted, being abused by doctors who are just over-prescribing medications, not even necessarily an ethical situation, and being able to move that person to a better place. So these are the kinds of skill sets that someone like Jill brings to the table. I think we'll skip study number 8 just in the interest of time. Here's an elderly couple, number 9, that has a disabled child living at home that they've taken care of for 45 years. My point here is that this elderly couple is very, very concerned about the end of their lives and who's going to take care of the special needs child that requires all kinds of care. So Jill can help, people like Jill can help in those situations, making a transition. Any comments on that, Jill? We're going to have to wrap up.
It's so scary for parents. It's so scary for parents who have taken care of the disabled children for so long. We have another client who, his brother is, we're worried about him, that he's not going to be able to function, and he's so worried about what's going to happen to my brother. And we've said, you know, we'll be there because we know him, and we'll be involved in his care team moving forward. He'll have another guardian, and we will, you know, advocate for him.
So last example, this is the obvious one. Successful couple wants to enjoy their retirement. The mother needs 24-hour care. The husband wants to retire to Florida, mainly because the wife really wants to retire now, not in 3 years, when mother is better. Jill, what can you do to give this couple peace of mind?
We also have somebody else who's moving, and they want to make sure that their mom is settled before they move on for their transition. And we just make sure that they're comfortable, and we place them in the appropriate place because they're not going to be able to be cared for by their children anymore.
Or could be managed at home.
Or they could be managed at home if they have a piece in place. In this case, we have a lady in the case, she can't afford a home, or she's living with her children, so she can't afford a home and she can't afford that kind of care. So she's going to move to assisted living. But for some people, they can be managed in their home, but they do need eyes on them because just having around the clock aides is not enough. There's not enough continuity there. There needs to be sort of a hub to the wheel, because if you don't have that continuity, then you know you have all these other people doing whatever, and you don't always have it all managed.
So hopefully these examples, I know we've gone over time, thank you for your patience. I hope these examples give you a sense of the on-the-ground, up-close and personal situations that these managers are dealing with and what they do to move people into the right positions and deal with things. I appreciate you coming, and again, if you want this post information from Dr. Susan Toll, give me an email or email Jeff. I'm sorry, Jeff? I'm not sure what you're saying, but anyway, thank you very much, and happy holidays to everybody. I'm sorry we went over by about 10 minutes. Thanks for coming in. And Jill, thank you for coming. Jill, thank you very much. Oh, and I have one.